think I've mentioned on this channel a couple times, I'm usually a pretty casual Sonic fan. Now, Sonic games, when it comes to like any of the new games, especially like the modern games, they've always been hit or miss for me. For some reason, Sega just makes them really like hit or miss, and they've always made them either really good or really shit. But in the case of like the original Sonic games, which I really like a lot of the old Sega Genesis Sonic games, but when it comes to the modern games, I'm very selective. Where there's comes like a lot of games where they've been completely mediocre. But in terms of like some of the games that have come out in terms of over the years, in terms of the modern age, it's always been either Sonic Colors, Generations, Sonic Frontiers, surprisingly, and Sonic Mania. Those games I've actually thought were really good in terms of the modern age of Sonic. Now, when it comes to racing games, Sonic has had a couple of different games that I've actually played that are actually pretty good in terms of like Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing and Team Sonic Racing. Now, obviously, when it comes to Sonic Racing Crossworlds, I was actually really surprised with how this game was going to be, and also the fact that I was really curious to see whether or not this actually was a really good game. I really enjoyed Team Sonic Racing, even though that game I actually do prefer over the disappointing remake of Crash Team Racing. Unfortunately, that game, which I'm not going to go too much in detail, but let's just say it is not a very good remake, and I really wish that Activision did not fuck up the game the way it was, but that's a whole different other topic. In case of this game, honestly, for me, I was really excited to see what Sega was going to do with this, since this game looked like, from the trailers, from what I've seen, looked like it had a lot of potential, considering that a lot of the other Sonic Racing games actually were pretty good. I really like Sonic Sega All-Stars Racing, and that was a game I had a lot of fun memories playing back in the day, and also Transform. With Transform, I didn't think was really that good, but it was nice to see that they added Wreck-It Ralph in the game, and that game actually was pretty good. And also, I did mention Team Sonic Racing, which I gotta say actually wasn't a bad racing game at all, even though some people may disagree. But I honestly thought it was actually pretty good. But for this review, we're going to be touching upon Sonic Racing Crossworlds and basically what I think about the game. For most of what I played of Crossworlds, I gotta say I think Crossworlds for me is a very interesting and very fun racing game. Especially the fact that we had Mario Kart Roulette come out this year, and pretty much that was kind of a competitor to that game, which we'll kind of touch upon what I think about that game compared to this game, and basically kind of go about with the comparisons. For most of Crossworlds, I think this game overall is pretty much a better predecessor to Team Sonic Racing, which that game had more of a team op kind of game where it was more so just a team racing game, which in a lot of ways I liked that, but at the same time it felt more like just a standard and very safe racing game. Not to say it wasn't fun, it was just the fact that I definitely felt like they could have done a little bit better with based on what they were trying to go with. In course of Crossworlds felt more like an average racing game that had a lot of fun, a lot of potential, and was straight up just a great racing game that differed from a lot of other racing games out there. Based on this game alone, you could tell Sega had a lot of confidence in this game, especially the fact that from the previous entries from Team Sonic Racing that was developed by Sumo Digital, this was a game that was developed by Sonic Team, in which Sonic Team pretty much has made a lot of Sonic games over the years, but this happened to be a game that they actually decided to work on, especially for a racing game. And the result is pretty much a game that is a lot of fun, very satisfying, and pretty much have taken different things that basically kind of used from other previous Sonic racing games and make them a whole lot better. And why is that, you say? Well, let's kind of break it down a little bit. In terms of the racing in this game, I gotta say, when it comes to the vehicles actually have a wide selection of different vehicles you can play with, such as you can play as a normal kart, you can also play as with the boat, plane, and you can pretty much use the hoverboards. Now, the hoverboards is kind of a nice little addition when it's actually reminiscent to the Sonic Riders games. Now, obviously, I do like the Sonic Riders games, however, the last Riders game that was on the Xbox 360 back in the day was not really a game I was a big fan of, especially with Kinect. The game was just ridiculously hard to beat. Still, it was a nice little addition that they added in this game. To be quite honest, with a lot of the vehicles in this game, I actually do admire a lot, especially when they pretty much kind of looked at what was in the other Sonic game that was Sonic Racing Transformed, and kind of saw what they thought was really into that game, and decided, hey, let's do that with this game. And I find they actually did it a lot better, where they actually gave you a lot more selection of different vehicles you can play as, and each of them do really well. I think the only thing that I actually do have a problem with is probably when you use the plane. In my opinion, I feel like the plane controls are very stiff, and they have a hard time as you're kind of maneuvering them. Obviously, you can kind of switch that with the different play styles and different settings, but I find it was kind of a pain in the ass to actually move around. But over time, I got used to it. Each vehicle that you select is a lot of fun to play, and each of them kind of have their own little play style, so you can kind of just adjust and make them a lot better for you. Most of the time, I feel like when it comes to all the vehicles, they're very easy to control, and I gotta say, when it comes to the drifting is a joy to play with in this game. So much so that I actually found myself really enjoying the drifting a lot more than I have with the previous Mario Kart games. For some reason, they did a great job with the drifting, and that's one thing I really look for in a racing game is the drifting. If you can make a drifting so easy to play, it's so easy to control, then I'm okay. I find that drifting in this is really satisfying, and it's very easy for me to enjoy. Even with drifting alone, speed is pretty much the main objective of this entire racing game. Pretty much you go as super fast, and you also collect a lot of rings, as well as try to drift as much as you can by going up to 4 different levels of drifting. And even as you're drifting, you pretty much can do like as many tricks and flips as you can, which honestly you can't really miss a trick even if you try to. Basically just stay steady on the track even as you're doing flips and tricks as you're basically racing along. If anything, drifting and doing different flips and tricks are pretty easy to execute. However, at times it can be a little bit overwhelming. To do higher difficulty, it can be a little bit overwhelming, especially the fact that every time you go really, really fast, there's a lot of things that's happening all at once. And in a way, you kind of exactly lose track of where you're going when there's items all over the place and you're basically just going as super fast as you can, and you don't exactly know where the hell you're going. It does get better once you actually turn on the camera settings, and it makes it a whole lot better as you're racing, even though it still can be overwhelming, especially with a lot of the items that are going all over the place. The game also contains different items that you get to play with, such as shields, tornadoes, boxing gloves, etc. A lot of different items that you pretty much could use in this game that make it a whole lot different, lot of fun. And to be honest with you, a lot of it is pretty much a wide different range of different ones you can play with. And even the Wisp, in my opinion, are also a lot of fun to play with. And in a way, it kind of competes with a lot of items in a lot of the Mario Kart games. And honestly, they definitely do a great job with it. Since the game is called Crossworlds, basically the main gimmick of this game is pretty much you basically travel through what I like to call travel rings. Now, these travel rings pretty much take you through different crossworlds that consist of different areas that basically help you kind of go through each lap as you're traveling through different areas as you're racing them. A lot of times, a lot of the areas are pretty much reminiscent from other previous Sonic games, and some of them that are actually brand new, such as Cyberspace, Digital Circuit, Dinosaur Jungle, Dragon Road, etc. A lot of them are pretty much brand new, and some of them are also pretty much like the other Sonic games that they are pretty much referenced there as they're there for fan service. And a lot of them are welcome as well. There are a total of 24 tracks in this game, which obviously there's going to be added DLC, which I'll get into that in a second. But for most of what I played from the tracks in this game, I do think they're actually a lot of fun, and I do really think they're actually really creative and actually do a lot better than what I've seen from other previous Sonic racing games. However, in terms of what I've seen from the tracks, I do think that some of them do kind of lack originality. Definitely when it comes to like Colorful Mall, for instance, that one kind of reminded me so much of Coconut Mall from Mario Kart Wii. It had so much of those kind of vibes, but either way, the track was still a lot of fun to play, and most of them are a lot of fun to play as you're going through each one. And they also are very randomized as you go through each travel rings, and you pretty much just go through a different track as you're going along each different ring, and you pretty much have to finish the race the way they are. Obviously, you can't exactly turn them off, but I still think that they're actually a lot of fun to go through, and they actually are really interesting and a nice addition to this game. In a way, the replayability in a lot of the areas is actually a lot of fun to go through, and I found myself really going back and actually trying a lot of the races again, just trying out those areas. A lot of the areas are just a lot of fun to play. And in a way, I do think that Mario Kart World, even though I'm actually going to talk about that game for a minute, even though I still love the game a lot, and obviously I know a lot of people are kind of like one-sided when it comes to Mario Kart World, but I do think that when it comes to the tracks in that game, the tracks, in my opinion, they could have done a little bit better with it, especially with the fact that even though it's kind of like the same concept as Crossworlds, where a lot of the areas are very morphed together, and they can basically kind of just go together as you're kind of each going through different races. But even though when it comes to Mario Kart World, you're pretty much morphed together, and you don't exactly get to randomize your different areas as you want, even though you basically can select and everything. But in the case of Crossworlds pretty much is very randomized, and you don't exactly really control what areas you go through, as a lot of them are pretty selective when it comes to the game. Mario Kart World, however, it can be a little bit repetitive, and even though you can actually replay a lot of the areas over and over again, but I still found it was extremely repetitive, especially as you're basically kind of on a paywall when it comes to online. The online, which to some people are very on the fence about the online in that game. Honestly, the way I look at the online for that game is that it pretty much is basically a paid service, and to some degree, some people like that kind of shit. For me, I'm not the biggest fan when it comes to Nintendo's online service, since I'm not really the biggest fan of it at all. But when it comes to a lot of the tracks for me, even though I really love all of them, as that game has pretty much 32 tracks as a whole, and yes, some of the cups are pretty easy to go through, but I do think that they've actually could have done a little bit more with the tracks, and even though they could have added more DLC with that game as well. Even though it's kind of a shame that Nintendo's not going to add any DLC into that game, which I really think they should, especially when the fact that that's actually one of their main games that's going to be selling for Nintendo Switch 2. And since we're on the topic of online, this game does have an online match mode, which honestly, the online in this game is actually pretty good. A lot of the online matchmaking is actually really well done, and even though it's very different from Mario Kart World, where obviously it's kind of a paid service, at least with this one, you pretty much can just play the online normally, and it's still a lot of fun to play. And of course, since it is a racing game, obviously we're going to talk about the character roster. Now obviously, since it is a Sonic racing game, a lot of the characters are consist of all the characters from the Sonic universe. A lot of them consist of Sonic, Shadow, Tails, Knuckles, Rouge, Amy, a lot of the characters that everybody loves in terms of the Sonic universe. And honestly, a lot of the characters played really well. As for me, I played a lot of Shadow, and I also played a lot of Knuckles, and of course I played a lot of Jet. Now Jet in this game actually was quite a bit different addition, especially when we haven't seen him since the Sonic Riders games. He was a lot of fun to play, more so that I actually played him a lot in this game. Overall, the character roster is actually pretty well done. And even though they added a lot of other characters from other previous properties that Sega owns, like Hatsune Miku and the Persona series, a lot of the characters I was really surprised that they actually got in here, since especially when this is actually a Sonic game. But I actually do appreciate the fact that Sega actually put a lot of effort in putting those characters in there. Especially when, even though some people may not like those characters and like those franchises, but at least they actually put them in there knowing that there's a lot of people that love Persona and love Hatsune Miku. And myself included, I really enjoyed both of them, so it was nice to see that they actually included in the Sonic game. It was also interesting to see that Sega actually would reach out to other companies to actually put some of their franchises into this game and add them as like DLC, such as Minecraft, Pac-Man, and obviously a lot of Nickelodeon properties like SpongeBob, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and Ninja Turtles. It's nice to see that we actually are seeing a lot more properties come in, and I also do think it's kind of interesting that they added a lot of Nickelodeon characters, since the last Nickelodeon racing game that we got was Nickelodeon Kart Racers, which in my opinion that game was quite mediocre. For Mario Kart clone, it was not really good, and it's definitely a car racing game that I would not recommend. That being said though, when it comes to the fact that Nickelodeon characters are in this game, it just completely blows my mind that SpongeBob is in a Sonic game. Never expected it in a million years, especially the fact that it's actually in a area where you can actually go through the Bikini Bottom track. I just thought it was just very interesting and bizarre to me. Never would think that SpongeBob would be in a Sonic game. It just completely blows my mind. That being said though, obviously you can play these characters in a season pass that this game offers. And honestly, the way I look at the season pass in this game, even though some people are completely one-sided on the fact that they added season pass in this game, and it does kind of make it somewhat of an incentive to some people, because since obviously they added all the characters from other franchises and stuff, in my opinion, I do think that the season pass can be worth it in some ways. Because the way I look at how Mario Kart World was, even though that game is not going to get DLC according to Nintendo, so in a way, I do think that Sonic Racing Crossworlds, their season pass, I think, is a lot better in my opinion, especially when they're actually putting effort in actually adding characters from other franchises. And I think it's actually a really good way to how they're going to do it. And I think that's kind of a good way to get people interested in this game, since obviously Mario Kart World, in my opinion, kind of lacks in that way, even though I still love a lot of the characters in that game. And the roster in that game is really, really solid, especially the fact that a lot of the characters have costumes and different outfits. And obviously they are free cosmetics, so I can't really say too much about what I think about the cosmetics in that game, since obviously they're free and you can actually play as them as you can play as those characters. In a way, I would say Mario Kart World has a better roster than what Sonic Racing Crossworlds does. But on the other hand, at least with Sonic Racing Crossworlds, at least it actually does a lot better in terms of the way that they're actually getting with the DLC. Because the way they're marketing the DLC is actually pretty smart, and it's getting a lot more people interested in actually trying out the game, especially getting into the season pass. And that's kind of something I think Nintendo needs to kind of look into in the future, especially when the fact that they want Mario Kart World to really sell. And I feel like if they really want that game to sell, they should really add additional content there, like add more characters, add more maps, because not to say I don't like anything that they have done with that game, but to me it feels like it's very empty. To me, I definitely feel like if they really wanted people to be more interested in that game, and actually make people want to play Mario Kart World again, then perhaps maybe they should add DLC to make it more exciting. Because the way I look at that game is that I feel like the game, even though you can basically play it for a certain amount of time, but there's not exactly a lot of replayability that's in that game, that you sort of feel satisfied. At least with Sonic Racing Crossworlds, it has that, where Mario Kart World doesn't exactly. And I feel like if they added content, like adding more DLC, and perhaps adding more additional content in the future, I think that it would really help the game a lot. And since we're actually comparing both these games, I gotta say when it comes to the price tag of this game. Now obviously when it comes to the price of Sonic Racing Crossworld, that's a game I feel like when it comes to a day one, at launch this game pretty much was $100. Now I agree with people that this game isn't worth $100, because I feel like with this kind of game it should have been like in the $40 to $50 range. Not to say I don't like the game, as it is definitely one of my favorite racing games this year, but I still think that the game, when it comes to the price range that they're offering, I still think it's kind of bullshit. Because the way I look at this game is that it's not really worth $100. And some may argue that obviously it's because of the season pass, but honestly I don't think that's the case. This is a game I definitely feel like it should be in the $40 to $50 range. And I think if they added additional content and everything, then I would understand. But honestly, the way I look at this game, it does not deserve to be $100. And especially nowadays when games are getting super expensive, and especially when I'm looking at it from the Canadian currency, this game is not worth that much. And some might argue that even with Mario Kart World, which that was a game that I do agree with some people that definitely does not need to be expensive as well. That game was $125 Canadian, and I gotta say, when it comes to that game does not need to be worth that price. And in a way, I definitely see that game as it's more of like a $50 to $60 game. Since a lot of the Switch games, especially before Switch 2 came out, they were around the $80 range in Canada. In tax alone, they were about $90. Now we're starting to see games go up to $100 and close to $130 now, which to me I think is rather bullshit. And that's kind of why I feel like with Mario Kart World, that's a game that I do think that if some people wanted to play the game, I think the game could be less expensive to play. And some may argue, obviously, because games have gotten expensive to make and everything. But the way I look at Mario Kart World, that's a game that you could tell Nintendo kind of just rushed that game with the way the content was. Not to say I didn't like the game, because I love Mario Kart World. But I do think that with that game, which is another game I do agree that does not need to be in that price range, especially when it's $130 with tax alone, I don't think that that game needs to be in that price range. And I could even say the same thing about this game. I do think that Sonic Racing Crossworlds, if you were to play this game, I definitely recommend actually wait to go on sale, because this is a game that I honestly think that is not worth that price. But that being said, I do think that this game is one of the best racing games I played this year, and for a game that definitely really surprised me how great this game was and how fun I have with this game, I do think that I recommend anybody who's really into Sonic, or just like racing games in general, I think they'll have a lot of fun playing this game. I think it's well worth it. Anyway guys, that is my review on Sonic Racing Crossworlds. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.